Okay, and I'm going to get us live streaming on Facebook.
So the U.S. president, whose mother was a nurse, who just recently passed away, was also the first U.S. president born in a hospital. Well, John, give us the answer to the trivia question.
You ready? Jimmy Carter.
Ah, very good. Very good. All right. Well, we'll just get started in just a moment here, folks. We are really anxious to have a great conversation about conservation.
Okay, everybody. I have started our live stream on Facebook, so know that's where you can go and share this with anybody who you think would be interested. It is there right now, and it will be available after we finish. So head over to IFU's Facebook page and share it. Aaron, I think you can go ahead and get us started.
Well, welcome everyone. This is the Iowa Farmers Union Lunch and Learn series. My name is Aaron Lehman, and I am the president of the Iowa Farmers Union. I farm here in northern Polk County. And it is a pleasure to have as our guest today, John Whitaker. Thank you for being with us, John. We're going to have a great conversation.
You bet. Glad to be here, Aaron.
So before we dive into our conservation conversation, I want to give a couple of Farmers Union announcements about some upcoming events. We have a number of lunch and learns that are going to be very, very enlightening. Next week, Tony Thompson, farmer near Elkhart, Iowa, also the founder of Prudent Produce, will be joining us to talk about his farm and his food system work. We're always glad to have a conversation with Tony Thompson. The following week, we will be talking to Toby Kane, who is the former chief of staff for Risk Management Association in Washington, D.C., but you know her here in Iowa for all her great work that she's done in Iowa, former Iowa Farmers Union board member. We're going to be talking about our USDA and the impacts of recent cuts in USDA. So check out the links in the chat for those two important lunch and learns that are upcoming. In addition to that, I wanted to alert people to another important event taking place on June 7th at 9:30 a.m., a public event at the Griffune Farm, just north of Ankeny. Our guest will be Federal Trade Commissioner Alvaro Bedoya, who will be joining the Farmers Union. And we're going to be talking about all sorts of issues related to family farming and the impact that the Federal Trade Commission has on so many important farming issues. And Commissioner Bedoya is going to be joining us, and he says whether he's getting paid by the federal government or not, he's going to continue to do his job. The Trump administration is attempting to remove Commissioner Bedoya, and unfortunately, that is happening at a time that is so important to family farming. But he's going to come to us, and we're going to talk about, of course, tariffs, corporate consolidation in fertilizer, seed, and equipment markets, meat packing industry monopolization, grocery store concentration, and all those other areas of enforcement that are needed. So join us in person on the Griffune Farm on June 7th, Saturday, June 7th at 9:30 a.m. Go ahead and look into the chat for how to register for that outstanding event. We were very saddened to hear about the death of Cornelia Flora, wonderful friend of the Farmers Union and such a tremendous presence in rural sociology circles around the country. We have put a link into the obituary for it, and please note that services are upcoming for that. We are very saddened by the loss, and our thoughts are with her entire family as they gather. We are so pleased with all the support that the family has given Farmers Union over the years. In her memory, we are beginning to initiate an effort to develop farmers union leaders. We often send our farmers union leaders to educational events, whether it be the National Farmers Union Women's Conference or fly-in activities or youth events taking place that bring together farmers union people from around the country. It takes a lot to send these folks to these events, and donations made in her honor will be put toward this important effort. So please consider giving in her honor for that important cause. We were so grateful that we were able to work with the family to consider this option and be, because we are so grateful for the support of the Flora family, and we are with them and remembering as they gather. We also wanted to make a quick note that the Young Farmers Coalition is having an event 1 week from today to deal with bird flu issues and the political implications of trying to deal with important issues like that under the current atmosphere at USDA. So please check out the link for that event taking place this coming week. But before we go any further, we want to jump into our conversation with our wonderful guest, John Whitaker. John is a fantastic friend of the Farmers Union. He served for many years as Farmers Union president. And I had the pleasure of working very closely with John on so many important issues. He's also a former state legislator, and he's the former USDA Farm Service Agency state executive director. After that, he was the executive director of conservation districts in Iowa. And of course, he's now working on his farm in Southeast Iowa, and that's where he's joining us. But today we're going to be talking about his insights on why conservation investments matter, how they impact our farms, our rural communities, and what's needed to ensure that farmers can have access and benefit from these critical programs. So it is a real pleasure to have John Whitaker with us today. Thank you for being here, John.
You bet. Thank you, Aaron. And I usually don't send out my resume because it just shows that I'm a has-been. I've been a lot of things and not anything anymore. But over those years, I've learned a lot. And one of the things I've learned, and you may not want to think about this, but we don't need conservation. We don't need to conserve where we're at. We need to do better than that.
Okay.
And that's one of the things that I think that we were getting from the Inflation Reduction Act. And I want to go back into that a little bit.
Sure.
Prior to the Inflation Reduction Act, there was a severe backlog of producers wanting to do conservation practices, regenerative practices, livestock practices, working with paddock grazing, regenerative type practices in grazing and grasslands and things like that. And really, producers weren't able to get the help that they needed from NRCS. And for two reasons. Number one, NRCS didn't have enough money to fund those applications for EQIP and for CSP and other things. Number two, they didn't have enough staff to lay that out there. What we got from the Inflation Reduction Act was that backlog became, we're taking applications, or they're taking applications, and taking that application, approving it, getting that work started in a timely manner. Because if you were waiting 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, whatever it was, to get into an application, then, did you lose interest? Did you quit farming? Something changed over that period of time. And so that was the importance of the Inflation Reduction Act. And one of the keys to that was that it offered staff. When I worked at USDA and the Farm Service Agency, we were given a number of people that we could hire. NRCS is a little bit different. They're given an amount of money that they can spend on staff. And they can spend that staff by hiring contractors as well. they contracted with CDI for 9 employees to do private lands wildlife work. Now, what did wildlife work have to do with NRCS? NRCS didn't necessarily have the technical expertise to be designing CRP that was wildlife friendly. And so these folks helped do that. They were all laid off. Actually, before I left CDI, we had negotiated an additional 25 employees, and then NRCS came back and negotiated with the new executive director. They bumped that private lands wildlife up to 15. Pheasants Forever, National Wild Turkey Federation also had staff that were helping with this. But the 25 staff that CDI had that we'd added were clerical. And that clerical part was an important part of getting the work done. Because if NRCS had time to design but didn't have time to notify the producer and to keep that communication flowing. So it was one for every 4 counties, worked with those DCs to keep that communication flowing. And sure, the conservation assistants do that as well, that are provided by the state, but they were already had their workload full. And it was welcomed by so many of the conservation assistants to have someone to do that work. I was recently in an office where one of those people had laid off, and I know the CA there. I've known that CA for a long time, and she just, we had come to depend on that person. And that's what they were looking at. The thing that the Inflation Reduction Act and getting rid of that backlog did was allowed farmers to learn those regenerative practices. And I'll get to other parts of that in a little bit. But an example that I've used for a long time, and I used this example even prior to being at CDI, is an individual that I know who has a long used regenerative practices. And I asked him one time if he used animal waste for his fertilizer component. And he said, actually, no, because the hauling charge for CAFO manure would be more than what he was spending on nitrogen, because he had built so much organic matter that he had reduced his nitrogen and still staying at above county average yields in his county. That he said it would cost me to put that on to replace my nitrogen because I don't spend that much on nitrogen. What he had found was storing that organic matter, which is stored carbon, was actually benefiting him financially. But we have to have the assistance, because if a producer doesn't understand how that works, then how do you get started? Aaron, you went through that in becoming an organic farmer. You started, you didn't do it all at once. And that's the key to regenerative agriculture: cover crops, planting green, always keeping a living root, doing no-till. You can't jump in with both feet all at once, particularly at the prices that we're experiencing in agriculture now. You need to have advice. You need to have someone, the agronomists, the planners, and NRCS lay out, this is how you do this. And so that was one of the critically important things to that. One of the things that this producer told me, 2 things about his soil: not only the nitrogen, he'd had a 4-inch rain, all came one night, and a 4-inch rain in one night in 5 or 6 hours is a pretty dramatic event. He didn't have any runoff. The soil was able to absorb and retain 4 inches of rain that came hard and fast in one night. 2 days later, he had a 2-inch rain. And he did have runoff from that, but it looked like it was coming out of a faucet. It was clean and clear.
Wow.
The other thing was, because, and he said he still doesn't know why, but when he experienced the derecho, and I asked him this question specifically because someone had called our CDI office and said, I've been planting green. Is that why my corn didn't blow down in the derecho? And so I called this producer because I knew that he had been doing that for a long time. And he said, well, I had corn that was blown into mine on one side because there's no fence there. Mine was standing straight. You get all across the field to the neighbor, there it was down again. He said, I had corn on 3 sides that you could see from the road, couldn't see the back. He said, my corn stood through the derecho. It was the only one that was farmed regeneratively. And so back to that point, we've got to give producers the opportunity to learn. And one of the things that I think that is critically important in this farm bill that we should have passed last year, we should have passed the year before, that we continue to delay, is we need to incorporate that increase in conservation spending. We can't let that backlog build back up. It's too important. Right. We can store more carbon with regenerative farming than you can in some rock in North Dakota, honestly. But we need to have that funding available and that backing within USDA to say, this is what we want to do. And it's critical for our future, for the future of the world. When you think about losing the organic matter that we have in our soil, and we've lost too much over too many generations now, it causes flooding. We have carbon in the atmosphere that we could have in the soil. And we have nitrates in our water. Right. Those are the critical things that we get from urging our elected representatives to pass a good farm bill that includes more funding for conservation, that codifies those levels that were put into the Inflation Reduction Act. And I know, given who's in power right now, we can't call it the Inflation Reduction Act, but it's critical that we have that.
And John, just to your point, you said that so these investments were making a huge difference. Massive backlogs of farmer requests. We're finally getting support, and we were finally building up some strength in our local offices to provide supports to farmers. And tell us about the impact of those cutbacks as they happen. Just out of the blue?
Well, you've got 2 impacts. You've got the impact on those individuals whose jobs were lost, but you've also got the impact on the producers. If I walk in there and say, I want this done, okay, we'll get to it. The problem with we'll get to it is things can change. 3 years ago, I had suggested to my older brother that we should build a small pond, not small, on one of the farms that we have in our parents' trust. And he liked the idea because he likes to go fishing with his kids, grandkids, excuse me, and I do too. But we just got to the contract point 3 years later. But that's another critical thing that is involved in this, is there are contractors, because we still need structures out there. We need those retention structures such as that. There has to be conservation practices above it that retain the soil so that it protects this for a long period of time. You don't get enough points if you don't have that. You don't qualify. And so we were lucky that we did, because we've done conservation for a long time, and we had a neighbor that had done conservation. But we had 12 contractors bid on that project. We had contractors from 50 miles away bidding because, well, they said, we're uncertain of what's going to happen. We're uncertain about the future. And when you have contractors bidding on a job that's that limited in scope, willing to drive that far to, in fact, the winning bidder is driving 40 miles a day to construct the project.
That's a good example of the wide impact on our rural communities that cuts and conservation programs can have. And tell us about, you've experienced work with farmers on all sorts of levels, John. Tell us about the impact of farmers who are trying to find a good conservation partner, and what it means when you have someone not honoring their end of a previous contract. How likely is it to build that trust up with farmers again? It takes a real partner, doesn't it?
When all of a sudden the rug is pulled out from under you, do you want to go back? And that's where we're at. If CDI had the funding to go back and fill those positions, if they said, oh, okay, that contract's good, they're starting all over. They're refilling those positions because those people were all laid off. That lack of trust, will it be here tomorrow, is very damaging well, it damages the reputation of those partners that are out there. And it really means this is somebody that you don't want to work for.
Yeah, and all that innovation, John. I mean, talk about farmers trying to innovate on the ground. What's it do to the larger innovation that takes place in conservation?
Yeah, that's it. That innovation is not shared then. That's what happens. That innovation is not shared. And sharing that innovation is key to it's a key component of that education process.
So, John, you mentioned how important it is that our policy leaders step up and talk about how valuable this is to Iowa. We're including in the chat a link for our folks to reach out to their congresspeople, both to the representative and to their senators, to say how important these programs are. John, what would you stress that people talk about when they're passing that message on to their policy leaders?
They need to stress the backlog that we had previously and not allowing that to continue to build back up again. And I would stress it by saying this: farmers want to do what's right. They want the help to do regenerative practices. They want the help to build the conservation structures. That's why there was that backlog. Farmers were begging for that assistance. And pulling that rug out from under them means that assistance isn't going to occur. And this is for the greater good of everyone. Fewer nitrates, less carbon in the air, less flooding. This benefits all of us.
Well, and John, you work with so many USDA service centers and rural communities in Iowa. How do these proposed cutbacks? What's that going to mean for service to those farmers trying to innovate on their farm, trying to bring the next generation on their farm?
It slows the process down. It just slows the process down when you're waiting for assistance. That's what it does. And, after you've waited so long, people just give up. That's right. That's what the net effect is. Farmers are going to give up trying.
Yeah, and in Iowa, we have such massive needs. We know from our nutrient reduction plan how huge the needs are, but we're relying on a farmer partnership with the public to get this done in a voluntary and incentive-based manner. What's it do to the larger strategy?
Well, I think that larger strategy there is that if this doesn't happen, eventually we see that it's going to be regulated. At some point in time, how do we cure nitrates in the water if the voluntary basis doesn't work?
Right.
Conservation has always been a voluntary practice. regenerative agriculture is a voluntary practice when people can learn how to do it. And if it becomes mandatory, it becomes a wedge between the farming community and the general public.
Absolutely. Well, John, you've been so gracious with your time. It's a very, very busy time on the farm. We're trying to get a lot done at this time of year, but it shows how important it is and how your dedication towards conservation in Iowa to join us today. So thank you for being with us and sharing at this really important time.
It's an honor to be with you, Aaron. I appreciate the opportunity, and I truly, truly hope that we can get something through Congress that benefits producers wanting to build regenerative agriculture.
Absolutely. And again, thank you, John, so much. We appreciate you being here.
You bet.
And we'll encourage people to reach out to their congressmen, their representatives, their senators here in Iowa to tell them how important a real farm bill that values conservation, that incorporates all the conservation benefits of the Inflation Reduction Act, all the climate smart benefits from the Inflation Reduction Act into a farm bill that works together, including farm supports, including crop insurance, including strong nutrition programs and rural development programs. All these pieces have to work together to have a farm bill with real integrity that makes a difference on our farm and in our rural communities and for our food system as a whole. So please check out the link to find your congressperson, to find your senator, and reach out to them, continue to do so, and tell them how damaging USDA cuts are at this critical time, and to support a farm bill that that has integrity for all the important pieces. So again, thank you so much for your time, John, being with us. We really appreciate it.
You bet. You bet. It's an honor, Aaron, to be with you.
Thank you so much, Christina, for bringing us together. This has been the Farmers Union Lunch and Learn series. Again, I wanted to remind people about some upcoming lunch and learns that we have in front of us. Next week, we will be with Polk County farmer Tony Thompson, who will be joining us to talk about his farm and about food system issues in Iowa. And after that, on the following week, on the 29th, we will be joined by Toby Kane, former Iowa Farmers Union board member, who will talk up and who is the former chief of staff at the Risk Management Agency in USDA, who will talk with us about the impact of USDA cuts and what that means on Iowa farms and in Iowa communities. So make sure you sign up for those important lunch and learns. So again, thank you, Christina. Thank you, John.
You bet. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good day,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Bye now.